I don't know, there's a lot of concept work done on how we want to run the factory, how do we want to use data, how do we want to, what does a robust supply chain mean? And what's the benefit of, picking one reactor across the whole network? I mean, it's huge.
Would you mind doing a little bit of a blurb about Fastnet? Like just a quick little bit about who you are, Dan, what your background is, why you started Fastnet, and just kind of where Fastnet is today, you know?
Oh, yeah, cool. Paul, thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for Amy and Chris as well to give me this opportunity to just have a chat. Yeah, I'm a chemical and process engineer out of MTU now with CIT in my time in Cork. And I've worked in pharma and biotech industries for, God, I hate to say now, but nearly 23 years. So, and I've done mostly client. I started off in A&E for a couple of years, but mostly on the client side. So I think I understand what the client's all about. And some of that was as a consultant, some of that as FTE. But I delivered a greenfield, and I've worked in tech transfers in PIs, greenfield capital projects. I've kind of covered all aspects of it. About 5 years ago, there was a change in the company I was with, and I felt there's a gap. I'm over in Massachusetts, so there's a gap, I think, in the East Coast for kind of true owners PM to really like just deliver, not just construct, like design build, but ORP. Get the product in, get the product up. Like that's really the project. You get people to design it, you get people to build it, but making sure they're ready. All aspects of product introduction are there. So that's how I run projects. So I felt there's a gap for that,
Yeah.
and there still is a gap, I think. But I partnered with a guy in Ireland then, Shane Kelly, who's a whiz with single use, and we got into the single use side of it. Again, I think COVID helped drive some of that in a positive way, where it put the focus on having robust single use programs, and we've focused on that. So there's two main areas really. The main area is the single use, and we've a number of people in Ireland and America kind of serving at this stage big pharma. We did a lot of work with startups as well, but I think the last couple of years with the higher interest rates have dried up a bit. But we do a lot of important work now globally, multi-network with single use, basically to pull it up into one supply chain, one network of one program, one library, I guess, of single use, and we're making a lot of traction on that. Like it's huge savings relative to the effort. It's humongous actually. It's fantastic. And then, I still do the day job of PMing and for the ORP. I think if the opportunity came, I'd have a team ready to deliver, say, a 2 billion or a larger project very efficiently. So I'm hoping, the near-term future will bring that opportunity. We'll see. But if not, we'll see. What drives us is not like people have not given up, but they've said you scale more, get more people in and all that. But Shane and I are not business people. We want to do the right thing. We want to do the right thing. If you don't, literally, if they don't want to pay us, it doesn't matter. Like we want to influence companies to do the right thing, and that's what drives us. And it still drives us to this day after 5.5 years. So I think that's what keeps me going. That's what keeps it going, is because there's always opportunity with companies to push efficiency, push better technology, and push better decisions. Like can you do the right thing? And whether they do or not, it's up to them. But at least if you get the chance to explain it to them and they listen to you, then you can't do any more than that. That's where we are really. Yeah. So it's great. It's good fun. I like it.
I want to get into the actual conversation we're trying to have here, which is we're trying to learn how to apply ourselves better in the industry. And what we're running up against is all these massive investments that are coming. And then, where's the planning? Where's the collective consensus on how we're going to approach it? Where's the standardization so we can do more with less? The age-old problem of like, are we over-investing in the same silos? Are we doing anything to consolidate? Dan, like where we're talking the prep there, was just about like not being intimidated by the science and the technology, and a bioreactor is a bioreactor, and we design it umpteen different times, umpteen different ways for every different project. And I mean, if we were making cornflakes, would we just not have the luxury of the investment of time, energy, lack of standardization? Would we approach this problem differently? And if we did, would that give us more flexibility and more speed to market with some of this stuff? because what we're building doesn't seem to be meeting the demand.
No, and I think look, there's two kind of flavors. One is the kind of a smaller startup that are kind of figuring everything out as they go. They have a product,
Mm-hmm.
and again, science will drive a lot of it, and they're excited and they're thinking of release, they're thinking of launch, they're not thinking of sustainable commercial operations, and you kind of have to let them off a bit because they're more not say the one-off, but they are one-off projects, and you can always say grow, then you can build in sustainability, we call it, right? But where these larger companies who've been around a long time, who've touted in the USA, especially large investment, um, they have an opportunity to standardize across this investment, and they should have a history of what works and what doesn't, from a technology point of view, from an automation point of view, from a single use point of view. And the reason I bring a single use is because, I think we learned during COVID that supply chain is key. Supply chain is very important. But we also learned, we should know from an experienced manufacturing site that maintenance is important, and just keep production running, right? So, I'd call it maintenance, data, and supply chain are the key kind of supports that will enable manufacturing.
Yeah, but you say data is important. I don't see any evidence that data is that important, other than just a kind of proof that.
Yeah, I think data is important from operability point of view. So, we're trying to alleviate the workload on humans, we'll call it, and you can use information then. So if information falls in a process, falls within a correct control band, you can move forward. You can use AI to predict, like, or not predict, but just basically agree, like, the batch is going well, and the operator there just to make sure just make sure nothing goes wrong, and if it goes wrong, they can react. But typically, it should just run, and that should run on information then. So that's where I think information could be used, data could be used efficiently, is on pulling up from the factory floor, just making sure everything's in check, and then at the end of the day, you should have a very quick release on your batch because all the data is sound. I think before, with more human interaction, there's a lot more reviewing because of the risk of human error, and it wasn't real time. You QA checks and things like that may have taken. It's down to human beings. So I think that's that data point. I would call it a data target, as well as as I say, maintenance like key. What is key to maintenance? What you need to everything up and running. Whether you designed it in the start, but in plus one, or you equipment, or you actually have a robust, quality based, risk-based plan where these items are key. We'll predict that they'll, fail in 9 months, we'll change out in 6, etc., etc. So it's seamless, right? So just again, a bit like the data-driven operations, you've seamless maintenance, and then the supply chain is back down to, making sure you have the technology, materials, whether it's raw materials, single use, or even technology, is picked appropriately, that it's not just fits the process and fits manufacturing, but you've good vendors, there's good business support, there's good backup. Again, if one factory goes down, say in Tennessee, you've another one in Maine, or you've one in Europe or somewhere that you can bring the parts over. So when that's not going to be done by design houses, like this work is not going to be done by any A&E firm. The challenge is these companies with these targets of investment should be now discussing this now. How do we build true user requirements that are not just process based, but really 30 years of a life cycle in a factory that will give us very seamless and efficient manufacturing based on those three cornerstones, in my opinion, are the cornerstones going forward.
How much of the onus is on the menu? Like when you talk, I think single use is a great example, because I feel like the end users are stuck with the same, maybe 3 big players. And like a lot of times, some of the problem is their connectivity is not great, or they force you into their own platforms. Like how much of that is a barrier to this ability to kind of create this plug and play ecosystem where you can build factories in a short amount of time?
Yeah, I guess luckily I work with a company that's kind of knows the thing about single use, but you basically design agnostic single-use parts, usually with a second source. But you basically make it very simple. So you have your unit op, which sometimes, again, the process may drive it, but I'd even challenge that. Like, do you need a certain brand of reactor when if the chemistry allows, if the biology allows you, into various ones, you'd be surprised because CDM, that's what CDMO is. Like CDMO will tell you got X reactor that you can't, you got to make it fit, right? So I think you can get around that. But back to the single use, you build a library of basically simple parts that you can then plug together, ideally closed. So you will have aseptic quick connects, and usually you design your unit op then with the aseptic quick connect, and you can simply tie it up. But with that, there's avenues now, or there's ways, not to plug the company, but with Fastnet, we can design agnostically and qualify agnostically, that basically you can fit any process into the qualification space, and you can just make sure your process fits in. So that gives you that robustness, right? That gives you that, like, hey, this part we can reuse anywhere along the process. We've designed it in like that, and you just ensure there's a backup. But back to traditionally single use, and it's analogous to, say, automation. It's driven by process and whoever designs the factory, but it's not. You need to make sure that the vendor is a good business partner, so they'll support you within, say, 24 hours of a part. So you have to factor that in, and you also have to make sure that they have the validation pack. So what happens typically is someone will design it and say, get this fancy 3-foot tube with, septic quick connects, but you pick a vendor, for whatever reason, might be short lead time to make the project, but they don't have the validation pack. So we typically factor in a life cycle approach of not just qualification or design and qualification, but also business support after the fact. And I think that's the homework up front, that these companies now should do, is like, who works with us the best, like who will support us the best. And there's more than 2 or 3 out there. Like, there's definitely a single use, there's more than 2 or 3. The same way there's a lot of automation companies, and an automation product. So what is the best fit? And you need to do that work up front, whether it's one factory or 10 or 5. Do that work up front, get a feeling for it, and then when you're ready to execute, you engage and you're clear on what your requirements are, and not just dive into designing, clean rooms, So I think that well, my point is, these guys, and I hope they're doing it, because nothing seems to be happening yet, is doing this work now, that they are thinking about what's it going to be like in 5 years' time? Are we able to have seamless operations in a new facility in Arkansas? So I don't know.
Can you say a little bit more about the why around this? Like, why? Because what's probably going on right now is not a lot of engagement from the end user, because maybe it's a new factory, maybe they haven't even hired the plant manager and all the people that are going to work at this yet. So who should be thinking about this, and what specifically should they be thinking about it? And when they hear what you say and they go, oh yeah, that's a good idea, Dan, but who actually should care enough to actually invest some money?
Well, I think that there's a gap, right? And again, I'm not privy to every company, but what I'm feeling is happening, there's technical people on the ground, the people we deal with, and they're very passionate about their job, and they're very passionate about what they want to do, and they want to get best in class automation, best in class single use, best in class systems for what going forward. And I believe at the very high level, there's a strategy to do it, but I think in the middle, there's a middle management will say, or I don't know what level they're at, but senior directors to VPs of, like, hey, let's translate, effective data management, like via in operations. Let's translate robust supply chain. Let's translate, non-human operations to where they're just basically stewards, but humans don't actually have to do too much. Let's translate that into reality. And I think there's a gap there, because that requires upfront work. And until something's signed off in a kind of a CapEx, it's hard it's hard to pull a team together and justify a team. But I think if the company has goals and senior management have aims for that, they should release resources internally to do that. And engage with the likes of us and say, look, what's potential here, like concept wise, because they do concepts with A&E firms, right, about what's potential, but they don't really. That's just building the factory, designing and building a factory. I don't know. There's a lot of concept work done on how we want to run the factory, how do we want to use data, how do we want to. What does a robust supply chain mean, and what's the benefit of picking one reactor across the whole network? I mean, it's huge. Has anyone ever done that? Like, I don't know, So I think why you should do it is standardization is key. Like in so many areas, like we've seen it in code, right? You can take code, plonk it from one module to another factory, just change a few things and done, right? So I don't understand why we have to, especially in biotech where it's a lot of equipment's off the shelf. Why we've just spent so long designing stuff, right? It's off the shelf. It's the same thing we did the last time, right? But going in with that direction is key, and pushing us to standardize, then pushing the people who design and deliver to like, look, I want to standardize operation, not just in single use, but standardize automation.
I feel like I've seen and heard that exact setup where it's like, this is a copy paste of this other facility, or this is the same factory over here. Lads, this is easy. Let's just get into it. And then they get into it, and then it becomes an iterative design, and the scope creep comes in and it starts to go off the charts. What's missing in those scenarios? Because it's either standardization and it's a lack of discipline in the organization, or it's a necessary deviation from the standard to improve something because there is actual differences. How do you control that? Because next thing, someone's changing a position of a valve in a building, and lo and behold, now you need an extra input or something, and something else is changing, and before you know it, you're behind the eight ball and you're building something new. Or the other thing is, like, you're trying to bring in another element of the design over top of the standard design. Does this happen? Like, is there a way to mitigate these kinds of challenges?
Yeah, traditionally it would happen, yeah. But I think, again, the opportunity, and again, I'm not privy to all the investment plans, but there'll have to be a huge overlap. And I think that if we take single use, like, you can build a library of, say, I'll be conservative and say 250 parts. It should cover you cell, gene, and MABs. The whole thing should be done in 250 parts if you did it right. If you could align end reactors and downstream somewhat and push that. Why it happens, why scope creep happens is, I think, and I think that traditional PMs don't get involved in the process. They're fixated on cost and schedule adherence. They don't understand changes. Not all of them, but the majority, I would say. While, for instance, if I was doing a project, the first thing I do is understand the user requirements, understand the process, understand true like what we're trying to do here, and then go out and then go out to the firms like yourselves or for automation or whoever and say, look, this is what I want, and hold you to it, as I do. I would, and I've done that where I've done an RFP for design for a BOD, and I cut out half the stuff because the engineering activity, so we didn't need it. It's the A&E's procedure wasn't ours. I said, I'm not paying for that, and we got it half, basically got the time done in half, and the price was half price, because again, I held it to it, but I'm not saying you need PMs who understand the whole cake, basically the whole bit of pie, and know, we could get all this fancy 3D automate. No, I'm not buying that, because I just need something to help the operators understand we're in process, like that. You need and that comes with experience, I guess, or knowing the process and knowing operations. It's a money, people in here, I would say traditionally pharma is a bit of there's money in the industry, so that's led us to letting this go, right? But that's not an excuse. That's not a reason not to be effective. Like, I think what should drive us is to do it the best we can, knowing there's a better way now in the 21st century of doing this. And the FDA and all the regulatory bodies are allow us to use risk-based approach to drive oversight, to drive, where we need robust paperwork, etc., or checks and balances for quality. They've allowed us for 15 years with the probably more, 17 years with the ASTM E2500, like that basically use quality and manufacturing knowledge to drive your quality requirements, your regulatory requirements, and that should drive your quality oversight. So in a MAB, you could have 10 CPPs. That's the only points, like DO and pH in a reactor, TMP in a downstream. You call them out. There's probably about 10. That's the only place you should need quality. Great for a project, but even better in the operations of life cycle of the factory, where if you need to do a change control after and it doesn't impact one of those points, then you don't need a site quality change control. Knowing that, like, you need to know the full lot, knowing that what you do in this project will carry through. But I'll go back to, again, the opportunity is with supply chain, with standardization. If you ideally, what you want to do is do a basis design for a facility, do one for different types, say gene therapy, which is very similar to MABs. There's just a transfection step. So the MABs and the gene is pretty much the same. Cell therapy will be a bit different, smaller, but do a basic design for a kit, location agnostic. So it has the Wi-Fi, it has utilities you need. Doesn't matter if it's in Ireland or in Alaska or in Mexico or wherever. This is the plant. And every bit is, you only need one spec then for each bit of aspect of that. So one spec and just rubber stamp it. Will you get 100% repeatability? Probably not. There will be some changes, for instance, hard versus soft water, etc., but very minor. But that's one spec, one data sheet. Even if you need a data sheet, I don't think you do, but one URS, etc., to carry all the way through. So that's what we're doing that in single use. We're thankfully able to do it because maybe single use is new, and it's location agnostic. But we're doing that, and the question is, why can't we do it with equipment? Why can't we do it with code? And then why can't we do it just with a factory that's just, there's our supply, our supply and return corridor, there's our upstream, there's our downstream, there's our utilities, there's our canteen. Like, why are we doing this every time? Just rubber stamp it and put a different flag next to it, or a state or whatever, wherever we're going.
I'm stuck on something you mentioned because it kind of blew my mind. So I saw some expansion projects, and we always, I don't know if we're gonna have to cut this out or whatever, but we always went back to, it's either Thermo Fisher or it's just Sartorius, right? Like from an upstream, I'm an upstream person, so it was like either of those two platforms. But you said like 250 parts, you can have all upstream and downstream. So you're saying there is a universe in which you can basically have an open source, not an open source, but like an open reactor where it's like you just drop in whatever bag you have from whatever supplier. And of course you got to layer on the automation and stuff like that, but where you don't need to go with those two players. Cause I feel I've seen so many sites that just go down that same pathway. And then, I mean, we had systems that were even not 21 CFR compliant. And then you have to go back to the vendor and you're like, well, this doesn't make any sense. This is your third generation of your platform. How are you still not?
Yeah, I think that what drives upstream is process development, right? And I think they have a very strong lock on the technology. And I think that my advice to companies is to think of that, like to think of the life cycle, like don't just let the scientists off and pick Thermo, because Thermo might not be a commercial, I shouldn't say that, but a vendor, Sartorius, whoever it is, may not be, your best friend commercially, right? I don't know, but that's typically what happens. So we are advised to companies when they're developing, call it GMP clinical or even non-GMP clinical, is be very, very careful on the technology you're picking, because you should think commercial. You should think, a life of 30 years of using this plus of this technology. The favorite challenge with it is not the branding, but if something comes out of clinical and they say you have to use brand X, and I'm like, well, they're expensive, their parts are horrible, they're not responsive, I don't want to use them. And they're like, well, you have to, and I'm like, well, we want to use brand Y, do a comparability run in small scale at as cheap as you can, right? And show the data that it's comparable, and guess what, it'll be fine. Some things might change, but overall in the design space, in the process space, you're getting good product, right? So I think we have to be a bit bolder there, and again, think of the whole life cycle of the product, not just, what they want in the early phase. As for technology, like we should be pushing agnostic technology. I can't say, there is an agnostic bag for upstream yet, but, you can, when I say 250 parts, I mean, you will have a set for a unit off for upstream, and you'll have unit off for downstream, and you're probably locked into it unless, you change the process which drives the change, but then you challenge that and say, why do I need to change my reactor X, right? And more often than not, you don't have to, right? Because you can just do a comparability, or if we're not going, say if you didn't go to build a site, you would go to a contract manufacturer, and they got what they got. They ain't got, unless you pay for it, they're not going to buy a new reactor and all that. So they'll transfer it in. Guess what? It works. Let's go. So I think it goes back to understand that, it's overused understanding the process, but understanding what's allowed in a process. I know there's a lot not allowed, but what is allowed? Yeah, agitation is important, but if we change the make and model of this agitator in this bag, but we still get, the transfection rates, we still get the growth rates, we still get the oxygen uptake rates, and we get the product, what difference does it make? So I think that I think it's a collective. Again, it goes back to collective. Like, it's not just a capital project manager and a project engineer deciding what to do. The business has to kind of drive a lot of this going forward. And I think you're right, Amy. Like 100%. This is greenfield future. If you're locked into an old site that have their ways and means of working, it's very hard to change that. Even from a people point of view. So I do acknowledge there are limitations to what is possible, but you push it as far as you can. You push, like, hey, can we do this? And until there's a genuine reason why you can't, then why not? So yeah. But yeah, I think that if we go back to the start again, like, suppose there's a lot of investment coming. Well, hopefully it does. I think when things calm down, maybe politically, or interest rates might drop, because they're probably holding on to money until interest rates drop, and then they'll spend some of it. The cost of money will go down. We could be in a place of expansion, but I just don't want to. I don't want to personally. I don't want to be doing the wrong thing. It'll just upset me. And I've no skin in the game. I'm not working for these companies, but I just feel that we'll have missed an opportunity here in the States. At least.
So, okay, I have a question. So let's pretend that you're at a site and they're green, they're gonna go, they're new, it's exciting. I've seen the philosophy of, we're trying to minimize time, so we're just buying a bunch of OEM skids as is, and that's kind of the extent to the time saving that they do. So what are you saying that they should be doing that's different? Are you saying that they should just stick to one OEM because it's standard, and then they can
They should come up with a strategy, right? So they should come up before you start the project. The project should start before the official start. You should have about 6 months of project planning on the end user side. Again, I've done that in smaller projects where we work with the end users and we come up with a really robust plan of what we want the space to look like, what we want the technology to be, what we want automation to be, what do we want it to be. Because if you go to e-guys, right, or if you go to an A&E firm, you just say, well, what do you want? And you're like, well, give me a list, and you bring up a list of what, and they're like, oh, I don't know. And then I've just been weeks figuring it out, and the clock is not just cost, but the clock is ticking. So you do that way ahead of time. You do some work on your own, do some homework, and say, what is the best? Is it thermal or sartorius? What's driving that? Is it supply chain? Is it process development? Is it, they pick the answer with the phone, they pick up, that's invaluable. So what is it that'll drive us to the technology, and having those answers ready for when you do kick off, bing, right, this is it. Having, again, I'm not here to sell myself, but that's what I would do. That's where I'm valuable, is coming in to start working with the end user, what they want, getting contracts out, and then off you go. You do, build it. I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but we just want this. And figuring that out is the hardest bit. Figuring that out for the new. But my point is, if this huge financial investment comes, don't just design one factory with an A&E in Cincinnati and one in Boston and one in Texas and wherever, or Greenboro, wherever they are, and there's no join up thinking. So no, think we want 5 factories. We want them to have this technology. We want the same, supply chain supporting it. We want the same maintenance plans across all. We want the same operating procedures. We want the same automation. We want the same everything. And it doesn't matter where it is. But you do that. You either do it with an A&E firm collectively, and then go out, or let's say, at a concept level, but bring the likes of you guys in for concept, that planning, and then go out, But what they do is they go out and they'll do it in silos, and it's like, well, why does this plant in Arkansas look different to the one in Boston, right? Why did they do that?
Thank you, Dan, for doing this for pitch, man. That's awesome.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, thanks. And sure, look,
Chris.
we should do it again in a couple of months, especially if things get traction and
Yeah, no, let's never.
if something happens.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that'd be brilliant. It'd be brilliant to kind of have a follow up.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot more. We could go deeper into a couple of different areas there now too. So
yeah, because I'm interested. I wrote down. I'm interested in talking about single-use consumables too, which is something we never really touched on, and I saw that as such a pain point, especially during COVID. There's a certain number of suppliers, and maybe they're coming from overseas, and now people are like, "Oh shit, it's got a 5-year lead time on this one bag."
Give us a call. We'll sort it out.
Yep.